Imagine a sweltering August night in Paris, 1572. The air holds none of the summer's freshness. Instead, it is saturated with the pungent scent of cold metal and rust. A young girl, draped in an opulent wedding gown, sits by the window. She has just completed a ceremony that was meant to symbolize peace, but in reality, became a gateway to hell. Outside the door, the air is torn by thunderous screams and the sounds of slaughter, while she, a princess of France, discovers she has been cast as the lure to entrap her own allies. This girl is Margaret of Valois, known to posterity as Queen Margot. Tonight, by the flickering hearth and through this narrative meant to be felt rather than merely remembered, let us step into the true odyssey of her life. She was the most precious bloodline of the Valois dynasty, yet within the political machinations of her mother, Catherine de' Medici, she lived as the most exquisite and desolate of sacrifices. She once saved her husband from the bloodbath of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre and, through 20 years of captivity, built a fortress of the spirit with her words. This is a story of aesthetic self-salvation, of mending dignity amidst brokenness, and of a profound longing for freedom born from the depths of absolute solitude. And the life of Margaret of Valois, the foundational colors were not the pink hues of courtly dreams, but the deep purple of power struggles. She was raised in a Louvre that breathed art but whispered of poison, exhibiting a startling literary brilliance from infancy. While her brothers were tutored in the art of statecraft, Margaret was already immersing herself in Plato and Virgil, composing elegant verses in Latin. Yet, in the eyes of her mother, Catherine, her daughter's intellect and beauty were mere collateral, to be spent in quelling the French wars of religion. She was forced into a gown encrusted with pearls, so heavy it made breathing a labor, to marry Henry of Navarre, a man of starkly different temperament. On their wedding day, Margaret refused to utter "I do" at the altar. It took her brother, Charles IX, manually forcing her head down from behind to make the nod appear as consent. This fissure in her destiny foreshadowed decades of resistance, a tenacity to find agency within passivity and to find a voice within silence. She realized that her marriage was nothing more than a political ceasefire agreement, and her body was the fragile parchment upon which it was signed. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre remained a blood-red nightmare that Margaret could never erase from her soul. In the early hours of the fourth day of her marriage, she was jolted awake by terrified cries for help as a blood-drenched Huguenot burst into her bedchamber, clinging desperately to her waist. The executioner's blade followed closely. In that moment, the refined princess did not recoil. She shielded the stranger with her own body, intercepting the steel and saving his life. Subsequently, clad in her blood-stained chemise, she navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the Louvre, attempting to pluck her new husband from the butchery commanded by her mother and brother. The composure she displayed amidst such primal horror made her a faint but unwavering beacon of mercy during the frenzy. She began to realize that the family that bore and bred her had devolved into a killing machine, and she had to forge her own laws of survival within the cracks. She established her own cultural salon within the court. Even during the darkest periods of war, she persisted in hosting poetry readings. With delicate lace and profound philosophy, she applied a glaze of civilization over a crude and violent era. This was more than escapism, it was a silent rebellion. If the world chooses destruction, I choose to create beauty. Between Margaret and her husband Henry of Navarre, there was no fairy tale romance, but there existed a covenant akin to revolutionary camaraderie. They supported each other during their house arrest in the Louvre, plotting escapes in the dead of night. However, when Henry finally fled Paris for the south, Margaret found herself trapped in a harrowing predicament. She was viewed as a spy by both sides. Her mother cursed her, her brother suspected her, and even the husband she had protected kept his distance for political leverage. This suffocating isolation from the world prompted her most courageous decision, to go into active exile and find a domain of her own. She wandered through the rugged mountains of southern France. In those remote towns, she was no longer the unreachable princess, but a wayfarer observing the human condition. She transcribed the folk songs of peasant women and studied the properties of local herbs. In the whistling winds of nature, she heard the rhythm of her own heartbeat for the first time. This retreat from the core of power to its margins was, in truth, the first time her soul truly touched the earth. She realized that freedom is not a gift bestowed by others, it is a dignity unearthed, bit by bit, from the soil of one's own solitary path. In 1586, Margaret was captured by her brother, Henry III, and imprisoned in the desolate castle of Usson in the Auvergne region. 20 years, the most radiant era of a human life, Margaret spent within those cold, damp stone walls.
Outside the window lay barren ridges. Inside, the monotonous flicker of candlelight.
Yet, within this absolute stillness, Margaret inaugurated the most brilliant creative period of her life. She began writing her memoirs, the first true female autobiography in French history. She no longer veiled family scandals nor avoided her own emotions, dissecting that bloody era with an exquisitely fine touch. She transformed her prison into an academy of liberal arts, translating ancient texts and teaching her maidservants to read and write. This resilience, to see through the cruelty of fate and yet choose to love life, became the profound foundation of her later years. She wrote of the nature of power: "It is so heavy, yet so hollow, like a silent chess match played upon a sheet of ice." As she walked the cloisters of the castle, every step treading upon the ashes of time, she moved with supreme elegance. In that prolonged solitude, Margaret finally understood: physical shackles cannot imprison a soul that takes flight through books. When Margaret finally regained her freedom and returned to Paris, she had become a living fossil of a bygone era. Her husband had ascended as Henry IV, King of France, and she, the former queen, elegantly consented to an annulment. She cared nothing for hollow titles. She even befriended her husband's new queen, Marie de Medici. She established her Margot Salon in Paris, which became the progenitor of all subsequent French salons. She remained devoted to her signature crimson gowns. Though time had etched lines around her eyes, her gaze remained as clear and resolute as a maiden's. She watched those who had once harmed her turn to dust one by one, while she, in the twilight courtyards, continued to distribute food to impoverished poets. This transformation, from being utterly damaged to reaching ultimate wholeness, allowed her life to radiate a dignity as hard and clean as marble before it finally faded. Every morning, she would observe the roses blooming in her garden. It was her final way of reconciling with the world. There, she was no longer a pawn in power struggles, nor the exiled consort. She was simply Margaret, a speck of dust that had finally found its home in words and aesthetics. In March 1615, amidst a cold rain where even the spring breeze carried a chill, Margaret of Valois closed her eyes forever. She passed away in the salon she had personally built, surrounded by the books and manuscripts she cherished. Her departure was profoundly quiet, as if she were simply completing a curtain call timed to the second. She provided the answer to the question posed in the prologue. She forfeited a youth that could have been squandered, but won an ultimate victory of dignity.
And you now, do you feel it?
That sense of peace, as delicate and stable as Margot's manuscripts, reaching across 4 centuries? The Valois dynasty has long since vanished, and the conspiracies of the Louvre have turned to dust. Only Margaret's solitary endgame remains in the deep midnight of history, like a faint lamp that refuses to be extinguished. This is a strength that does not need to roar, the finality of an aesthetic self-savior. Tonight, may you drift into sleep accompanied by the scent of Margaret's writings and the steadiness born of her absolute self-possession. The world has fallen silent. It is time for you to let go of the day's distractions.
Good night.